This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast. Welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. So, ironically, in the improvement that I mentioned last week of lighting up my domain, gracefulatheist.com, I lost quite a lot of ranking on Google. So something you can do to help is to Google Graceful Atheist, to Google deconversion, to Google secular grace, and find my link and click on it. That would help bring up the ranking again. Please subscribe to the podcast wherever you are listening. Special thanks to Mike T for editing today's episode. And I want to mention that we had quite a bit of audio problems during the recording session. That is my fault and not Mike's. I'm going to ask for your patience for the audio quality during today's episode. On to today's episode. My guest today is CG. CG is from Nigeria. CG grew up in a very strict Christian home where he was only allowed to watch Christian media, which basically limited him to American and UK media. He went to a very strict Christian college. At one point, he moves to the UK for a while, and then eventually to the United States to finish his graduate work, where he changed from theology to business. CG has an amazing story. He calls himself an existential humanist and a planetary humanist. He has a very strong sense of justice that he wants to bring back to his home country of Nigeria. He describes the experience of being an immigrant in the United States and how difficult that is. CG has a blog at africanpolymath.wordpress.com, and he is accessible at africanpolymath@gmail.com. Of course, I will have links in the show notes. He also has put together a set of resources, including a reading list at a Google Drive link that will also be in the show notes. Here's my conversation with the African Polymath, CG. CG, welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast.
Hey, David. Yes, thank you very much for having me here. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
CG, I think you have a particularly interesting story to tell that is maybe different than many of the stories we've heard thus far.
Yes, that's very true.
So can you describe yourself a little bit and then talk about kind of your upbringing in Nigeria?
Okay, so yeah, my name is CG. I've grew up in Nigeria for most of my life. Then after I was there for like 20 something years till my beginning years of college. Then I transferred to United Kingdom, got my bachelor's in business, then moved back to Nigeria for a while, for a short time, then moved to the United States to get a master's in business. And I've been here ever since. I worked for a while in the United States. And now at the moment, I'm getting a master's in counseling. So yeah, that's pretty much my story. But when it comes to the childhood upbringing in Nigeria, for the first few years, my dad was not a believer. My mom was, and all that. So for the first 6 years, our home was just like a normal home. I don't remember too much from that part of my childhood necessarily. But it was when my dad became a believer that everything just full force came. That's when I started feeling like the weight of Christianity on me as a kid. Okay. So my dad had a problem with, I'm sure I've heard this testimony of like sexual sin, or sexual immorality, as people called it. So he had a problem with sexual morality. He used to like step out on my mom and all this stuff. However, he got saved and whatnot. Then he now became very radical about his faith in Jesus and all that. And that's how but what he did was that for a while he was chill, but he became more dogmatic. Okay. Because his father had a problem with sexual immorality too, or whatever. So of course he's trying to do damage control for his kids so that his kids don't fall in the same path. I'm sure you understand what they can do. So he went on like he went to restrict everything, every form of media that was not Christian. Like I mean every like cartoons, Power Rangers, Tom and Jerry, Mickey Mouse, Lion King, if it didn't have a Christian label on it, we're not having it. It's not like, oh, this is a secular neutral thing that is not. My parents were not doing that, especially my dad. He became very, very strict on that. That's one of the things I really felt a lot in my childhood.
Okay.
when it came to religion and all that. And this, yeah, but so most of what I was allowed to watch was Christian channels and TV shows and cartoons and all that. Those are the only things we're allowed to watch. We still watch the other stuff, but anytime we got caught watching the wrong stuff, maybe it's Power Rangers or Tom and Jerry or something, we got whooped. We got beaten up because of that.
Yikes.
Yeah,
Right.
and it's very bizarre when I tell people that here. So yeah, so most of what I was allowed to watch that I could watch in peace, at least when I didn't have to sneak off to watch stuff, was mostly Christian TV shows. I used to watch the CBN News by Pat Robertson. I'm sure you've heard of it.
Yes. Yeah.
That was very popular. I watched a lot of that. I think I watched that almost more than any other thing I watched. That was an adult program.
Yeah.
In my life. That's one thing I watched a lot as a kid. Then I watched a lot of TBN, the TBN Trinity, what's it called? Broadcasting Network. Watched the channels that belong to TBN, like JCTV, the youth channel. Then Smile of a Child was the kids channel. That's what I watched in between my childhood to my teenage years. So that's what I spent most of my time watching. What I started realizing later on was it kind of disconnected me from my own culture because most of what I watched was American.
Okay.
Even though I lived in Nigeria.
Yeah.
So most of what I watched was American. I was not allowed to watch almost anything on any of the Nigerian shows. There were not really that much Nigerian Christian channels to watch.
Okay.
So most of the people that had like a very strong maybe market on Christian entertainment was America and I think the UK. One channel in particular in the UK called God TV. That is the one I used to watch a lot as a kid too, and even as I grew older. So that's what my childhood. I used to listen to a lot of Bible on tape. Do you remember those? I don't know, you never know those. So they have recordings. So what they do is that they read the whole Bible from beginning to end. Like let's say King James, most of it. They read the whole Bible. Then they'll have like people that act out different parts of the Bible. So maybe there'll be a different voice for King David. There'll be a different voice for King Solomon. There'll be a different voice for Prophet Isaiah. That's how I used to listen to that a lot when I was a kid. I actually liked Revelations a lot because there was a lot of like sound effects and all that stuff. Yeah, that's what I listened to then. And I watched the usual, like, it was so interesting. Then I watched the usual American shows, Donut Man, VeggieTales.
Yeah.
I think Bible Man. I don't know if you remember Bible Man. So Bible Man, VeggieTales, most of all the stuff that people that watched Christian American entertainment watched, I watched all of them. Kobe's Clubhouse, Salty Songs, Superbook, Flying Happening. Yeah.
I have to confess that I actually still like VeggieTales.
It's actually a fun show if you think about it. Yeah, they were not of course they were kind of preachy, but they were not like overly preachy, and it was entertaining actually. It's one of the shows I actually enjoyed. Yeah.
So let me ask one clarifying question.
Yes.
So you mentioned that most of the media was from the US or the UK.
Yes.
But Nigeria itself, is there a heavy Christian influence?
Yes. So yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I skipped that part. I was supposed to get to that. So yes, there were like different veins of Christianity. I can't go into it because it's going to take too long to explain. But there's the Anglican and there's the Catholic vein of Christianity, and there are like other variations of Christianity that seeped into Nigeria, especially during the time pre-colonization and during colonization in Nigeria. So I think there's a guy that wrote a big book on it. I was supposed to read it, but I never got the time to. But the one that I would say that particularly influenced me is the Pentecostal movement. That's one that influenced my life immediately. But Nigeria is heavily religious. It's split mostly between Christianity and Islam.
Okay.
And all that. And Christianity and Islam made such powerful inroads into the country that they were able to push all the traditional religions into the margins.
Interesting.
All within a matter of like 100 and something years.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. I rarely ever met anyone that was practicing a traditional religion growing up. And I grew up in the capital of Nigeria, Abuja. And I don't remember ever meeting someone that practiced traditional religions, because Christianity and Islam had grown so powerful and very strong.
Okay.
And they pushed all those religions down. And in a way, what they did was that they demonized the religions.
Right.
And said that these religions are of the devil. But our true American Christian religion is the true one, and whatever. That's one of the things that they did. They even had one of the evangelists who was in Nigeria too, that I think in one of the translations, he kind of changed I need to verify this, but I think he changed one of the definitions of evil, whatever, to one of the gods, some of the African gods or the Nigerian gods.
Oh,
that's for the Bible.
Okay.
So he now made the African gods like the persona. Yeah. They destroyed the African religion and cultures in the name of bringing Christ or the gospel to Nigeria and other African countries, as you can see. So those were the big ones. But the one I think I would say the Pentecostal movement was the one that entered in very fast and very powerful, more than, at least in my opinion, than the other ones. Now those other ones are very entrenched and they are powerful too. I'm not in any way diminishing stuff, but Pentecostal movement came very fast,
right?
Because they came through like missionaries and crusades. There are a lot of big crusades. I'm sure I've heard of Reinhard Bonnke, right? I don't know if I've heard of him.
I don't think I have, but okay.
Reinhard Bonnke is a very popular like preacher and crusade. Yeah, so he's one of the people that had a lot of crusades in Africa, and there's Benny Hinn too that had a few crusades in other African countries too. I'm sure you're very familiar with Benny Hinn.
Yeah.
So there were a few of the other like ministers that these are some of the big ministers there. There are some ones that I don't really remember too much because I've not studied that part of the history, but those were some of the like big people, and there were a lot of big crusades, and the Pentecostal movement came in very, very fast and all that, especially during the time when we were trying to gain our independence from the British Empire,
okay,
and all that. So we're still like everyone was vying for power. There was clashes. We're in a very vulnerable state, and Christianity kind of got us very hard on that point too.
Okay,
there. So that's one of the areas that Christianity really got us. Yeah.
Is there much tension then between Islam and Christianity in Nigeria? Is there cultural war between the two?
Yeah, there has been tensions before, in the past too, between Islam and Christianity. Yeah.
Okay.
I was a kid, so I never even I was kind of protected from that. Now, there were some times where like the Muslims and Christians would clash and to get bloody and all that. But not at least, but for the most part, one of the things that makes it not to happen every time is that the Muslims have a particular part that they are very concentrated in Nigeria. That's mostly the north, while the Christians are kind of more in the south. So that's why we don't have as much clashes as we do in the past. In the past, it got very bad a few times. Yeah, it got bad, like bloody. But now it's not really that's the case because, like for example, I grew up with Muslims as my next door neighbors.
Okay.
And they were very nice and kind. Like I grew up with Muslims my whole life. I hung out with them when I was in high school, elementary school. They used to even like during Ramadan or one of the Muslim holidays, they would send like food to my parents or something. And sometimes during Christmas, my parents would send food to them or something. Yeah, so we had that kind of relationship. I lived in Abuja where there was a lot where we it's like the central part of Nigeria. That's the capital. So we and Muslims had to work together. And my parents grew up, there were a lot of Muslims there. Because that place didn't used to be the capital of the country. They made it the capital in like the 90s, around the time I was born.
Okay.
And all that. So that was there were a lot of Muslims there, but there were a lot of Christians there. And many of us we don't clash too much, at least in the capital there. But other parts of the place, if you publicly say you're a Christian, especially in the north part of Nigeria, yeah, that could be problematic. Yeah.
Okay. So you grew up with a lot of US and UK Christian media.
Yes.
And almost disconnected you from your own culture, you say. So what happened next?
Yes. So after my dad restricted every, I think many things that I don't want to, before I continue, I'm like, my parents are loving people, they mean well, but their actions sometimes what is dogmatic. So when I keep going, you understand why.
Right.
So when they cut off everything, there's sometimes that maybe my friends will be in school, be talking of how like they watch this movie. Let's say, for example, Lion King was very popular, or Mulan or something, or Mickey Mouse. And I had to like hide the fact that I didn't watch it because my dad wouldn't allow me to watch it. Then I didn't invite friends to my house because of how strong my dad was on like how strict he was. And I was ashamed of it in school.
Okay.
So I had to keep hiding. So I had to like keep hiding all this stuff in my heart. Apart from like the other stuff that I watched, one of the few things I enjoyed doing was I enjoyed reading as a kid. So I used to read a lot of like Christian books and stuff. My parents had a lot of those at home. I liked a lot of like fiction.
Yeah.
And all that. So I don't know how you read a lot of Christian fiction, but have you heard of Frank Peretti?
Oh yeah.
Frank Peretti. So my three favorite authors as a kid was Frank Peretti, Ted Dekker, and Francine River. And D. Henderson.
Okay.
So those are my three favorite Christian authors I used to read as a kid. And I read their stuff a lot. They actually shaped who I am as a person as a kid because I enjoyed reading their novels. I used to read their novels and reread them as a kid. So that's what like shaped me as a kid, and that's what like affected me growing up and all that. The first books I think I read as a kid were Christian books. Benny Hinn's Good Morning Holy Spirit and Josh McDowell's Apologetics book, More Than a Carpenter. Although I barely remember what I read, but the Christian fiction was the thing that really got me as a kid and all that. But it's later when I got older and I started realizing how I had to keep hiding who I am. hiding hiding my Christian life from my friends in school. Because even though, of course, we're still in a very religious culture, many parents cut their kids some slack. My parents didn't do that.
Okay.
It was, you had to be on fire for God all the time.
Okay.
Yeah. And so the next point is when I went to high school. Now in high school, this is where like my faith wasn't kind of like dwindled. I wasn't passionate about God anymore. I didn't do any bad thing per se, but I wasn't just passionate about God. All I cared about in high school was just about being popular and liking. I only liked 2 girls in high school. Just chasing 2 girls. These 2 girls I liked in high school, and that's it.
Being a normal teenager, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. But I wasn't serious about my faith. That's all I did. So there was nothing that happened. There's nothing. My faith kind of like, I think it's now that I think about it, my faith kind of just like dwindled down. So I was just more of, I had a passive faith, but I didn't do anything bad, necessarily bad, or sex, drugs, or smoke as a teenager. And again, my parents were very strict, so I barely could go out of my house to hang out with friends. So I had a very kind of, I would say I had a kind of lonely life and all that. It's spending time like watching some of these Christian shows, particular Christian shows that I found fun. Like one of the other ones I watched as a teenager was JCTV, is the teenage channel or youth channel for the TBN. And they used to show a lot of like rock bands. So rock bands actually shaped who I am Christian rock bands shaped who I am as a person, whether it's Audio Adrenaline, Reliance K, then most of the Christian artists, Stephen Curtis Chapman, Toby Mac, like Immigrant, Natalie Grant. Like people say like, are you sure you grew up in Nigeria? I'm like, yes,
I know, exactly.
So these were the kind of things that kind of gave me solace. Then, of course, when we got older, we were able to watch a lot of the stuff we were not allowed to watch because we got smarter in our disobedience and our rebellion the older we got. And because we were very good with technology.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's one of the things those are the things that shaped me. Then this was the things that happened and that was very integral to my faith journey was my dad got kicked out of his church.
Oh, okay.
Because of politics and power. They thought, because my dad is a very passionate, radical kind of Christian, even till now, like ever since he was in his 20s, like when he got saved. So they thought, the pastor, the main head pastor of our church, he actually came here to Oklahoma where I live to get a degree in Masters in Divinity. So he went to start a church in Nigeria. Was a very nice guy. He was one of the people that showed me a lot of kindness as a kid. Because as a kid, I had so much energy. Even now, as you can tell, I'm very energetic in the way I talk. But as a kid, it was worse because I would jump around, move around.
Yeah.
So during the church service, I'll be like tapping the pastor, and my parents would feel so embarrassed. But the pastor would hug me. Yeah. And he never made me feel bad once for nagging him or bugging him. And that's something that it really touches my heart. And I really miss that about him. But there was a problem. Brain cancer got him.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm sorry.
And he died like in his 30s or something. It was bad. We prayed for him in the church. He seemed to be healed. Then within a few months, he came back again and he never recovered. It was a very strong blow to the church that I grew up in. And he loved my parents almost more than anyone else in the church because my parents were deacons in his church.
Okay.
They were leading us like the Bible school of the church, like the small Bible school section of the church. And he loved my dad a lot. But he started noticing a lot of the political stuff against my dad. But since he was the head pastor, I was able to protect my dad from all that. But when he died, there was no person that could do that. It was not, everything now fell on his wife. And his wife had to grieve her husband and keep the church together at the same time.
Right.
Then a lot of people were jealous of my dad's popularity in church. And they now said that my dad is going to take over the church from this woman. He's going to like take over the church. He's going to have to do a power play. So they like organized a meeting. They organized like a church meeting, as you know, Christians love to do. They organized a church meeting against my dad and got him kicked out of his position without him even being there. He just came and saw he was fired from his position in the church.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that broke my dad. It broke him down. I think he didn't really. I think he said. I think my dad told me that he could have died because of what they did to him. Because he didn't expect. He thought that Christians are expected to be loving and caring. They will never kick you out of your position because they're jealous of you, as you know. But that was not the case.
Right.
And that really destabilized him. And later on, subsequently, he later on started his own church. And how that affected me was that I lost when he started his own church, which meant that I had to leave that church, and all that. I lost all my Christian friends.
Yeah.
All my childhood Christian friends, all of them gone like that. because I had to go. Now, of course, I went to boarding school because I spent all my high school in boarding school. So I had friends in boarding school, but that really affected me, losing all those my childhood friends, all because my parents got kicked out and they felt like God wanted them to start their own church and all that. That's one of the things that affected me as a teenager. It was really painful, yeah.
Right. I can imagine. Yeah. So you had to change churches and you lost a lot of your Christian friends.
Childhood friends, yeah.
Yeah. And how did that impact you?
Yeah, and it was devastating, but there was nothing that I could do. And my dad had to tell me that, it's because that it was painful for me to leave this church. And it really was painful for him to leave the church that he left.
Right.
And he felt like it was difficult, like God really wanted him to start his own church. But for me, it didn't. I look at those people in church that got my dad kicked out. And I'm like, yeah, well, what you didn't think about his son who had friends in the church. You just got him kicked out. You don't know what he did. That's how it is. I pushed it at the back of my mind and all that, but I'm like, well, why? It didn't bother me too much because in boarding school, I had friends in boarding school. So that kind of filled the gap for me. But I didn't have friends in church that I could hang out with. And the problem was that in boarding school during the holidays, I couldn't hang out with those friends because my parents were very strict about who I was going to hang out with and all that. And one of the things, again, my parents really pushed this purity culture stuff on me and my siblings.
Okay.
More so because of my dad's past. He now said that you have to push the purity stuff. So anytime, even on a Christian TV station, if a woman had a cleavage, if a woman was showing even revealing dresses or kissing scene, boom, off. Just like that. Even if it was a Christian movie, my dad was like, nope, and he would do that. That's how strict he was. And he pushed that a lot on me. Okay. And so it was long because and the thing is that it creates a certain kind of loneliness in you because you can't. Of course, I was able to connect with people, but you can't reveal who you fully are because you have to hide this part. Because if you tell, even when I was in high school or something, when I kind of even maybe revealed how strict my parents were, people would make fun of me.
I see. Yeah.
And all that. So I had to hide it from people.
You're hiding yourself from your parents because you are having to restrict your behavior.
Yes.
And you're hiding yourself from your friends because they don't know how strict your parents are. Yeah.
Yes, you actually got that very right. That hiding myself from my parents, because I still did watch all those stuff that I was not allowed to watch, but I had to do it in hiding. Yeah. And I couldn't, in a way, instinctively as a child, I knew I couldn't reveal everything about myself to my parents. Right. Because I knew they wouldn't like it. But I couldn't reveal everything about myself to my friends either. Yeah. Too. And that kept happening to me. And I feel like that till now. It hasn't really changed, to be honest. Okay. Till now, that's how I feel. I'm 28 now, and that's how I feel. And that's followed me ever since. And because I changed elementary schools and high schools a lot, I changed elementary schools 5 times. Oh, wow. Okay. And all that. I changed high schools twice, changed colleges twice. So I've always been moving. I've always had a nomadic lifestyle. So I always create friends, lose friends. Then the only thing that was consistent was just that strict Christian lifestyle. And the other few things I was able to enjoy, that I was able to hide away from my parents. And the Christian things I was able to enjoy on my own, like those Christian books, novels I told you about, and Christian music videos and rock band stuff. So that was what it is. But this is where things now started changing as a teenager. Okay. My dad now got very big with the prosperity gospel, word of faith stuff. Now, that had always been part of our life, the prosperity stuff. Because now, word of faith and prosperity are very synonymous, but are not exactly the same. So I always maybe have to explain that to some people. Okay. There are some people that are pro-prosperity, but are not pro-word of faith movement and all that. And they're very different. So something happened to so even when I was a kid, we used to do, I have to explain the word of faith movement maybe to the listeners who don't understand what it is.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, me too. So
So the word of faith movement basically was created by a preacher in the early 20th century called Kenneth E. Hagin, right here in Oklahoma where I live. So God apparently healed him from 2 sicknesses, like a blood disease and a heart condition. Then now after God healed him, God now made him a preacher or something as a young man. He now God now started giving him visions, prophetic dreams, visiting him in person and all that, and telling him about the doctrines that need to be given to the church now. And the main doctrine he pushed was the idea of faith. Okay. About how faith is a tangible force. So the idea is that faith is a tangible force. And we first of all have the normal faith to get saved. So this is the faith in the gospel. So you have the faith to get saved from the power of sin and death. That's the basic one. However, God actually wants to give us God actually gave us faith to improve our lives here on earth.
Okay.
And all that. So that is health. So in our physical body, we have to always be physically well. So God has given us faith for physical healing. How also God has given us faith for material possessions to be able to live well on this earth immaterially. Those are the main ones. There are other things like maybe doing well in your workplace, doing well at school and all that. It's just about having prosperity and success all around you. That's what the Word of Faith movement did. So one of the tenets of it was that you always have to confess God's word. So for example, I'll be like, maybe if you're like David, I'm like, I am David. I am blessed. God has given me favor. I'm going to make $1 million next week or something like that. Of course,
Yeah.
that's maybe extreme, but you have to keep confessing the word of God. And they always had scriptures to justify all this stuff. So it's not like he just made it up. There were always scriptures. Like how Jesus said, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you speak to this mountain and it will move. And that is like Mark 11:24 or something. So they always had scriptures, especially from what Jesus said about using your faith, speaking to your mountain. So if there's a sickness in your body, you speak to your sickness and say, leave my body. Then the cancer or whatever will disappear. So there was all this stuff that you could use your faith to do. So you always have to make sure you had a positive confession. If you said negative confession, like if you said, hey, I am sick, that means you're confessing the wrong thing. And you're opening the door to the devil.
Interesting. Okay.
So if you confess the wrong thing. So even just saying I am sick, even just saying I am sick. So of course, even just saying I am sick is like, no, that's wrong. Or saying I am broke, that is a wrong confession. Okay. You always have to say I am blessed, even when you're poor, because that proves your faith. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So it proves that you can still, it proves that you believe God, even though your circumstances tell you otherwise.
Okay.
So you always have to confess the word of God. You always have to make sure that you didn't hold unforgiveness or bitterness towards someone else, or else you're opening the door for the devil, and you won't receive your healing. You won't receive your money that you're supposed to do to pay your bills. You won't do well in school or in your workplace. So those are some of the core things that you had to do. It's much more deeper than that, but that's like the basic stuff. Having victory and success in all areas of your life. Yeah.
Yeah, so I went to a Pentecostal church, an Assemblies of God church, and there were elements of that, but it was never quite that formalized like you're describing.
Yeah.
Just even saying I'm sick or I'm tired or something, or I'm broke, wasn't an issue. So yeah, that's pretty intense.
Yeah. 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 The word of faith takes they take what you say, because the Bible says we'll give an account. I don't remember that part in scripture that says the Bible says we'll give an account for every idle word that we speak, or something like that. We'll give an account to God. So you have to make sure that everything that came out of your mouth was positive. You always have to control it. And you have to make sure that there's no sin in your life. So you have to, and my parents took this too much to heart. And they literally controlled our environment with all that stuff. And the thing that made my dad to go very deep into it was that he went for like a business trip, and he fell sick and he almost died. Okay. And he started listening to these Word of Faith preachers, and he felt like these people were the ones that spoke to his situation. Okay. Spoke to his situation or his sickness here. So that's why he decided to push it on his kids too, because he wants his kids to succeed. He doesn't want his kids to be poor or sick or whatever. So that's why he pushed it hard on us. And one of the things they talk about in Word of Faith is like, when, let's say, for example, maybe you have a bill that you have not been able to pay. You're going to get evicted soon. And you have been praying for God to give you maybe $1,000, and the money hasn't come through. You have to keep fighting and believing, even though there's no evidence that is coming, because God is testing you, or the devil is testing you, right? And all that. And one of the things they used to always push was that God was a good God, and God will never do evil stuff. Every bad stuff came from the devil, and every good stuff came from God. And they always had ways to rationalize all those scriptures that prove otherwise. They're like, when the Bible, for example, says God puts leprosy on Miriam, if you remember that part in Exodus, where God put leprosy on Miriam, and it says it's the leprosy of God. It didn't say like, oh, God, but the way the Word of Faith movement will say it is that God permitted leprosy to be put on her by the devil, right? Because of Miriam's sin. That's how we used to rationalize all those scriptures. And they always had explanations to do with those difficult scriptures that made it seem like God was the bad guy, putting evil, sickness, and all this stuff on people. That's how they used to get around it.
But that part sounds really familiar of just
Yeah.
rationalizing one scripture over another.
So exactly. So yeah, rationalizing. So yeah, that's how it was. And this was one of the problems now with my parents starting their own church. They have to keep this image that their doctrine works for them.
Yeah.
So they would put pressure on us to perform as preachers' kids because we're there to protect our parents' image.
Yeah.
And all that. That's one of the things that really got me. That it was so, because you have to be watching out. First of all, I have to deal with all this internal turmoil in myself about hiding who I am from friends and my parents. Then I have to now make sure I'm doing well so that my parents look good.
Right.
To prove that their word of faith doctrine is working fine.
Yeah.
And sometimes my parents didn't get to know that, like, sometimes they were so focused on protecting their image that it now affected us.
Right.
Too. And sometimes one of the issues I have with the word of faith movement is that they can be so callous that, let's say, for example, they prayed for someone and the person died. They'll say it's the person's fault because the person didn't have enough faith.
Right.
Because according to the word of faith, you're supposed to listen to the word of God. The more you listen to the word of God, your faith grows. So if you didn't have enough faith, maybe because of sin in your life, or you have not been building up your faith for years, by listening to sermons, then it's your fault that your friend died, or that you died or something. They always found a way to take the responsibility off of God. Right. And put it on people and say it's the people's fault. And that's what made a lot of these preachers very callous.
You remind me, I had David Johnson of the Skeptics and Seekers podcast on months and months ago, but he talked about being a pastor's kid and having to bear the secrets of his family.
Yes, I remember that. I remember listening to that. Yes, I remember that.
So yeah, I was going to ask if that's similar to you.
Yes, exactly. That really connected to me when I heard that a few months ago and I listened. I was like, wow, oh my God, like this is so, he understands, because you start, especially as I started getting older, you start seeing the flaws in your parents who are preachers. Yes. And all that. You start seeing their downside and whatever. You now see the part of their lives that they are not portraying to the church. And it's not because they're trying to be fake, but they're trying to push this doctrine and all that. So you have to like keep all these secrets in yourself. And that that's not something a child or a teenager is supposed to be carrying. Right. Too. And it's unfair that, and you don't have to be dealing with all these church people that will be like talking to your parents like, hey, look at the way your daughter is dressed. Why is she dressed like this? Look at the way your son is dressed. I saw your son here, blah, 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 whatever. So carry that kind of burden in your heart when you start seeing your parents' flaws and all that. I mean, it's overwhelming. And because I didn't have people I could talk to about that specifically, I struggled. Now, thankfully, I had my siblings. I had my little sister and my little brother, which made it easier. And all that, but still, I couldn't talk with it to anyone else. So it was a secret that all three of us shared, and all three of us had to support each other with all these secrets and all these burdens, all this burden of being a preacher's kid. So that stuff was very right. I remember that podcast, and it was very, very accurate.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we should maybe just pause for a second and say what you've hinted at, that it's not that your parents are trying to do the wrong thing. They love you guys.
Yes.
And they love the church and they're trying to do the right thing, but the standard is inhuman. They can't live up to it. You can't live up to it.
Yes.
And everybody's trying to live up to something that isn't humanly possible.
Yes. That's the problem. And that's the thing we have to, even especially when I deconverted and I was so angry. Now, even as a Christian, I started having problems with them as a Christian, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I used to be so frustrated. I'm like, what is wrong with you people? Like, and I'll get so angry. And later on, I started realizing that they are human, that they have good intentions behind what they do. They really genuinely care. Like, my parents care for me. That the reason why I'm in the United States, they paid for my tuition. Like, they genuinely care for me. Right. But that part of their faith is the problem. It's inhuman, like as you said, an inhuman standard that they're pushing on their kids. And that's what is so sad. Like, they are, in a way, I've heard someone say they're like being slaves to bad ideas.
Ooh, yeah.
They have good intentions, but their actions and their ideas are very bad. That's the problem. Yeah. So the next point was when after I graduated from high school and I went to college in Nigeria. Now, the college I went to in Nigeria was one of the worst Christian colleges it's one of the worst in the world. I'll say that. And I mean that I'll call it a fundamentalist, tyrannical, puritanical, like shithole. That's what it is. That's what it was. Terrible. Yeah. Like, it's one of the worst. Oh my God. We were not allowed to have phones in college.
Okay.
We're not allowed to have cell phones at all.
Yeah.
I mean, not like, so you have to keep your phones with like someone else, or you have to keep your phones with your parents back home. Anytime, if you step foot into the college, you're not allowed to have phones. We're always supposed to dress professional. That's wearing a shirt and tie. That's for the men. Women could break the rules, but for the most part, you have to dress professional too. No matter what time of the day, you always have to have a tie on, except in the evening time when classes are over. And we're not allowed to wear jeans. So we're not allowed to wear jeans at all. At all. You're not. If you got caught with jeans in your like backpack or something, you'll be in trouble. So you have to make sure your jeans was at home somewhere and it wasn't in college. It was so strict. They expelled and suspended students every semester.
Wow.
Every semester, students got expelled and suspended. And this is how bad the expulsion is. Let's say you're in your, maybe, I think in America, they call it like senior year of college. That's like your fourth year.
Yes.
That's your fourth year of college. If you got expelled in your fourth year of college, they won't release your transcripts.
Oh, wow.
At all.
Wow.
They won't release your transcripts. So you have lost all your 4 years there. That's it. You have to start over from scratch.
Wow. And I imagine they charge you for this privilege.
Yeah, they'll charge. Of course. Yeah, of course. Oh my God. Yeah. They'll charge you, of course. And of course, this brings me to one of the big things about the prosperity doctrine and how this thing has infiltrated Nigeria. This is one of the most destructive doctrines that has infiltrated Nigeria, almost more than any other doctrine.
Yeah.
And all that. And it's because our school, the name of the school is called Covenant University. It's owned by a very rich preacher. I think he was recently labeled one of the richest preachers in the world.
Oh, wow.
Now, he's one of the richest preachers in the world. I didn't say in America, I didn't say in Nigeria, in the world.
Right.
And Nigeria, my country, recently, a few years ago, became the poverty capital of the world before it was India. And yet he's one of the richest.
Wow. And
he runs that school. And he's very big on the prosperity stuff. He's like a demigod. He's like a demigod. He's like, in a way, he's like the Nigerian version of Kenneth Copeland.
Right. Okay.
Because he's very good friends with Kenneth Copeland. Actually, he's very good friends with Kenneth Copeland. Like he reveres him. So he's a very guy. He has a lot of power. He can bully. In my opinion, he's like a bully. He can do whatever he wants because he's a very rich preacher. And he pushes that prosperity stuff. So he created that university that I was attending. And he used to brag about how like he doesn't like our tuition that we pay. He uses it to water the grass. That he's doing us a favor. He's doing us a favor by letting us attend his university. I'm like, fuck you. That's what he's saying.
Yeah.
He's so arrogant. He talks about how like the God has blessed him. He has like a private jet or two now. He has like a private jet. He's very rich.
Yes.
And all that. And he ran that university and he was very strict. And many of our professors and staff were very mean. They were cruel. They were bullies. And this is a Christian college. They would and if, let's say when they were expelling students or suspending students, they'll announce your name in front of the whole chapel, in front of all the students.
Oh, wow.
And make you climb the stage, make you take like a walk of shame. Yes. They'll give you like a walk of shame for that. That's how strict it was. But surprisingly, even in that place, that's when I started to get more serious about my faith. But it's despite the school. Even as a Christian, when I started getting serious about my faith, I hated the school. I didn't like it. And I was a fundamentalist myself. And I hated the school. Because it was too strict. And it's in this school, but is in this school that I started having problems with the prosperity doctrine. So one of the part of the doctrine I told you about was that you would be doing well in school. But I wasn't doing well in college. My grades were very bad.
Okay.
And I started wondering what I was doing wrong. And I started realizing, like, what am I doing wrong? Is it the fact that I don't have enough faith? Do I have sin in my life? Like, because the problem is never God's fault. It's always your fault or the devil. But usually it's you.
Right.
It's mostly your fault. That started like chipping into my faith and all that. And it didn't depress me for like, the thing really started getting into my emotions because I was wondering, what was I doing wrong? I listened to a lot of these Word-of-Faith preachers. I listened to hours and hours of their sermons, like a ton of hours of their sermons. Kenneth Copeland, Creflo Dollar, Keith Moore, Jerry Savelle, all these prosperity people. I listened to these people for like a long time. And that's why I started having a little bit of problems in my faith. I was like 19 or 20 years old. Then there was a defining moment. Now, this is where I think it's a kind of, I don't want to call it a good mistake, but it was a very big mistake I made. So I read this book by the Christian apologist called Ray Comfort.
Okay.
And all that. So Ray Comfort, I'm sure you know Ray Comfort, you know, the legendary banana
Yes.
preacher, whatever they
Yes.
call him, apologetics guy. So I read a small, like tiny book by him called World Religions. I think it's the World Religions or something. It's like an apologetics book about how to evangelize to people of different faiths. So there was a chapter that got to a part about how some people are not really saved, even though they call themselves Christians.
Okay.
So and I read like a testimony of a guy that was a preacher that thought that he was saved. Then he now said that after he listened to Ray Comfort, he now found out he was not really saved and all that. That story got to me for some reason, and it created a reign of terror in my heart that followed me it followed me till last year.
Okay.
Because do you know what reason why? Because I thought because I was not doing well in school, that I didn't have enough faith, and maybe that showed that I was not a true Christian.
Oh man.
So reading that Ray Comfort's book and that testimony, along with my doubts about not doing well, that was the perfect storm.
Yeah.
And that thing caused a lot of mental anguish for years in my life. So yeah.
That's amazing. You know, I say it quite often that I think apologetics actually hurts believers.
Yes.
You know, it's intended to build up your faith, but in many ways it can have the unintended consequence of making you less sure that you're doing the right thing.
Exactly. Yes. And that's what it did, because I wasn't expecting it. Because I remember I was in my sister's room. I think she was in school for the holiday. I remember how I felt. I felt so when I read that story, and I remember the fear that struck my heart. I started having like stomach problems. I went to the restroom because the fear struck me so bad.
Wow.
And I started like trying to get saved. And I started trying to get saved multiple times because yes. I was scared that I was never really saved. Yeah, do you understand? I'm sure you know, many ex-Christians understand that. I was afraid I was never really saved. That really hurt me badly.
No, I think that is very common. People get baptized multiple times. They say the
yes.
sinner's prayer a bunch of times.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, they're just never sure.
Yeah, that thing was so painful. And what happened was it started affecting me physiologically because for some reason, even though I tried to get saved multiple times, I never got a strong assurance that I was saved. Okay. Like I never was sure. Like that's for some reason I was sure before that time, but after reading that book, I was never sure. Now, of course, there's sometimes that I would have assurance for like a while, but it never lasted long. Within a while, I'll get triggered again. Maybe listening to a sermon would trigger that stuff. It started affecting me physiologically so much that I started having chest pains. Oh wow! It got that bad. Yeah. I started having chest pains. I had to go see a doctor in 2014 because of that. Wow. So they performed like they did like X-ray scan. They used one of those scans that they give like pregnant women. They kind of did it for like my chest area too. They did like multiple tests. They found out I was fine. They said that you are fine. There's nothing wrong. But I still felt the pain in my chest. Yeah. And even till now, of course, it doesn't hurt me. I still feel it till now, and I'm still recovering from it now. That's how bad it was. And I was always conscious of sin. Like I was like the smallest thing it's like, let's say for example, this is so bizarre. Let's say there's a sign that says, tie up your trash bag before throwing into the trash. And this really happened to me. Tie up your trash bag before putting into the trash. Maybe, for example, I didn't tie up my trash bag, or they say use an actual trash bag. I'll just use a plastic bag instead of using a trash bag. I would not feel guilty for that. Yeah. I'll feel guilty about the littlest things. Looking at a woman with lust, not doing something, not obeying my parents, listening to the wrong thing. Like I'll feel guilty about it for a long time. And my mind could never rest. This haunted me for years. Wow. Okay. It was one of the most painful experiences of my life.
It sounds like it.
Yeah. I started having like nightmares about God throwing me into hell. Wow. I'm serious. Nightmares. Yikes. Especially after that event, for like 3 nights in a row, I had nightmares of God tossing me into hell. Just imagine dealing with all that. And I couldn't tell anybody. I couldn't even tell my siblings. I dealt with all that internally. I will not be able to sleep because I'm scared that if I sleep, I'm going to wake up in hell. I'm burned in hell. Then anytime I listen to all these sermons, I'll get triggered. Yeah. That sometimes that even, let's say for example, fire and brimstone preachers. If I even saw a preacher that I knew was very big on preaching fire and brimstone stuff, I'll get triggered. Even just seeing him. Right. That's what it did to my mind. And it fucked me up. Because some of the big preachers I used to be very big were like, I'm sure I've heard of Jonathan Edwards, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Yeah. One of the most popular, like, fiery preachers of the 16th century. There was another one, he's a Calvinist called Paul Washer or something. There's another one, John F. MacArthur. He's one of the Grace Bible Church. He's one of these fiery preachers then. There There was another one, A.W. Tozer.
Yeah.
Or something like A.W. Tozer was a very popular preacher in the 19th and 20th century or something. Then John Bevere too. There were many of these preachers were very, anytime I even just listening to them, they would just like trigger me. And they would trigger this fear of death and fear of hell nonstop. And this is a cycle that kept going on and on and off. It would stop for a while, but it come back up. So that's what happened with me during that period. It was painful.
I think you're describing something that many people experience, the religious trauma of taking it seriously, right? The point is that you believed it. You believed it was real. And because you believed it was real, that was a real threat.
Yeah.
And you felt an existential threat on an ongoing basis of maybe I could go to hell.
Yes. And imagine feeling that literally. Like you could feel that. I could feel that in my body, in my chest, in my stomach, feeling it in your body. It's not just feeling it in your mind or your imagination, but feeling it in your body. And I was carrying that. And I had to carry that for a while. Okay, thankfully, that sometimes maybe for a few months, it won't bother me. Maybe for like 3 months or something, it won't bother me. But it will come back again. So it never like could stop long term. And I said that maybe if I had maybe if I have a special encounter, like all these people, all these preachers, I said they had a wonderful testimony and God gave them peace about them being saved. But God never gave me that kind of encounter. And I had to struggle because I was always scared I was not a true Christian. So it got very bad. But one of the things that changed was I left that shitty Christian college.
Okay.
I moved to the United Kingdom and all that. So I moved to London. So I started living in London, UK. And it was a very unique experience. So I was lonely for a while, but later on, I started attending Hillsong Church. I'm sure you know Hillsong.
Yeah.
I know that Brian Houston, Darlene Sheck. Yeah. So I started attending one of the London campuses. And being in London and even in Hillsong, I started meeting people from different cultures, different faiths, because Hillsong is kind of like a seeker-friendly,
right,
like young people hype church, different denominations, different places and all that. So they invite a lot of, they don't hire and brimstone stuff. So they actually make it very attractive stuff. So they make it very attractive to like young people. So I had a lot of friends there that were like maybe not even, many people that were like nominal Christians. I had friends that were Calvinist, friends that were like Pentecostal, that even if they were not Word-of-Faith, they were like a different variation of the Pentecostal or charismatic movement. I had friends that were like Anglicans, Catholics, all this, whatever. So I met different people from different faiths. And that started making me see that I grew up in Nigeria, Christian bubble, Word-of-Faith bubble, that I grew up in Nigeria. And actually it was a very wonderful experience being in Hillsong. I got over a lot of my depression and stuff when I was there.
Okay.
Actually, I would never trade that even as an atheist now, I would never trade that experience for anything in the world because it meant so much to me.
Right.
At that, it really helped me. Just spending time with different people. I made a lot of good friends that were Christians. It was such a fun experience. And they were more like liberal than American. And even the Nigerian churches. I remember I saw the first time I saw a preacher holding alcohol. I was like, what?
Yeah.
I was like, what? He holds, like, this is strange.
Yeah.
And all that. But I found out they were not very hardcore. You see many of the preachers, they would drink there. So it was just more free. Like I went out, like I had a few parties with some of my friends in church. It was all good and all that. So it was a very good experience for me.
Okay. Yeah.
And it really changed my experience. And that's when I started like changing. One of the things that happened though was some of my Calvinist friends, Calvinists sometimes have a tendency to like to argue. And I like to
yes.
I like to prove how right they are.
Yes.
However, in this particular part, they were kind of right. They started like disagreeing with me and calling me out on the prosperity doctrine.
Okay. Yeah.
And all that. They're like the first people I ever met who challenged the prosperity doctrine, because I never met anyone in my life who challenged me about it, because prosperity doctrine is very big in Nigeria.
Yeah.
So you don't meet that many people that challenge you, although there are many people that don't like it in Nigeria too, but no one ever challenged me. People that I called my friends until I moved to the UK. So it started like changing me just a little bit. And one thing was that when I would see some of my friends who were like broke, who like were making close to minimum wage and all that, and they were very kind-hearted, like they would pay for my meal.
Right.
They would refuse to allow me to pay because my parents had money. And to an extent, they still do, because apparently God blessed them. Because my parents' business was doing well. So God, and that's one of the things that again I wanted to mention. I made my parents go deeper, because when they started getting wealthier and they started making more money, it started proving to them that yes, our doctrine is right, and it's the very right doctrine. That's one of the things that happened.
Yeah, that's how they interpreted the success.
Exactly. Yes, you got that right. So that's one of the things but meeting these guys really started making me rethink the Word of Faith stuff, but I still held on to it for a while. However, I couldn't listen to those Word of Faith preachers anymore because of what happened to me, that bad experience. Okay. So I started listening to preachers that emphasized more of grace and the gospel.
Yeah.
And all that. So one of the popular preachers his name is Joseph Prince. He's a preacher in Singapore and all that, but he's very popular on the Christian media and all that. So listening to this Joseph Prince guy, he's emphasized the gospel, the grace of God, forgiveness of sins. He started like helping me deal with the guilt and shame and fear of hell and all that stuff better than many of these Word of Faith preachers did. And I listened to other like grace, what they call like grace preachers and all that, preachers that emphasize more of the gospel and grace than maybe wealth, than they emphasize hell and all that stuff. Right. That's what started like changing in me when I was living in the UK. And one of the major things I changed my mind on was just the end time theology. I started like branching out a little bit. I started studying other Pentecostal theologians. Okay, right. And all that. And that's when I changed I dropped the, Left Behind bullshit, Left Behind, yes. Like end time, whatever. Tim LaHaye's book, the Left Behind series. Right. And what's his name? Hal Lindsey. What's his name? Jack Valampe. Like many of these people that used to emphasize I've forgotten what it's called. I've forgotten what that part of doctrine is called. It's not pretty theology.
Eschatology.
Yeah, eschatology, yes. So I dropped the whole like idea that there's going to be a rapture. Because one of the things that the particular Pentecostal preacher, theologian I was following, his name is Jonathan Welton. He was not a fan of rapture theology. He even wrote a book called Raptureless. And that's why I dropped the rapture stuff. That's one of the major things that changed. And then I kind of started growing an interest in maybe in like politics and conservative politics. That's what started changing. However, there was a big problem now. My parents started sensing that I was changing.
Yeah, okay.
And all that. So I came back one holiday. And I have to emphasize that my parents mean well, but their actions, man, oh my goodness. What happened was they found out I wasn't listening to this particular Word of Faith preacher anymore. Then they now all of a sudden got very livid. They started preaching at me. What they now did was that they actually booked a flight for me to leave the UK to attend a conference by that guy.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, to fix me now, let me emphasize how expensive that flight is. In Nigerian currency, the Nigerian currency is lower than the American dollar. Okay. So it's expensive for them to do that. Right. But they did that to fix me. They kind of like booked a trip. And it's expensive. They paid for my trip. They now like, of course, they came with me. They came with my parents and my little brother came. They now like passed through London, picked me up, and we now attended that guy's conference for a whole week. Yeah. Just to bring me back to the Word of. I didn't even say I stopped listening to Word of Faith preachers. I just stopped listening to this one preacher that they were very big fans of. Yes. And see how they overreacted. They spent tons of their money. Yeah. And in my mind, I'm like, why are you trying to gaslight me? That trip, they made me cry and weep because they kept nagging me. And they didn't like the fact that I was not playing sermons out loud. It was just, I'm like, I'm still a believer. And see how they treat me. That's one of the things that started causing me that. And that's what the things that made me now see that now more than ever, I have to be hiding more stuff from my parents because this is how they're going to react to this one thing. And all that. So after all that happened, I finished my bachelor's degree in London. I left the United Kingdom, moved back to Nigeria. But I got so used to my independence in the UK that it started affecting how I was relating with my parents. And it was very bad for that. I was with them for almost a whole year. And we kept fighting. It was not going well. Then that's when, and all those, the fear of hell and all that stuff started coming back to me in stronger force. Yeah. My the chest pains I told you about started coming back. It was very bad. Then because living in London and living in Hillsong in particular meant that I lost all the good friends that I made. And I had a lot of friends, plenty of friends, just within those 2+ years I was there. And I lost all of that. And I didn't even get time to grieve all that. Yeah. Then to not come back home and be fighting with my parents. So it was just very hard. So later on, my parents and me kind of decided that it would be better if I just go and get a master's degree. Okay. Because I couldn't really get a job at the time. So I decided to come to the United States to get a master's degree. And all that. And it's when I came to the United States that when I now decided to come here to get my master's degree, I came to a Christian college here in Oklahoma. I didn't want to come to Oklahoma. I didn't even want to come to the United States because I loved London so much. Right. And I didn't want to just move to a new place. And I was like, if I move to Oklahoma, man, like, why would I want to move here? It's boring as hell, Yeah, because I had been to Oklahoma in the past before, like a few times when I was in my late teens and very early 20s. Is here actually met Ted Decker as when I was like 19.
Oh, okay.
At like a book event.
Okay.
I was so happy because I'm like, he's my childhood hero. Oh my God, he's here. Like we took pictures. He was so kind. He was so nice. Like, oh my God, he's here. So I came to US before. So when finally I started attending it, I first of all wanted to study. I wanted to get a master's in divinity.
Right.
However, I changed my mind and I was like, no, I'll just get a master's in business. And my reasoning was, I want to do something that is more practical and pragmatic, something that will help me get a job, something that will help me break away from my parents.
Yeah.
Easily. Even though I liked studying theology,
right.
I still went to study. I still went to switch to business. And that's what I started doing. So during this time, I experienced a lot of isolation here when I came to the United States.
Yeah, I can imagine.
As an immigrant, this really confused me because there's this Southern hospitality, as the Americans call it. Oh my gosh, like everyone acts all nice. Like, oh my gosh, nice to see you, David. So could we hang out sometime? Like, and of course, they don't mean that you should really hang out. They're just saying that.
Right.
But in my mind,
God bless your soul.
But I, as a Nigerian, believe that.
Yes. Yes.
And even though they don't really mean it, it's like, they don't really mean it. Someone's like, no. It was, even though my sister came here before I did, so she kind of prepared me, but still, I was so isolated here as an immigrant.
Yeah.
It was so, then I struggled here. Like, so I still made a few friends around, but they were very different from my friends in Hillsong when I was in the UK, because in Hillsong, they were more liberal. There were more diverse people here, but people were not here diverse in terms of culture or in terms of even just theology of whatever. So people were very narrow-minded here. And that really made me struggle for a while. And because I started having a lot of questions about the Bible and all that stuff, I barely had anyone I could talk to about it.
Yeah.
Then one of the things that started puzzling me, even though I couldn't understand why then until later on, was this idea of Christian missions. I started realizing how dehumanizing it was.
Yes.
Whatever. They'll tell a 16-year-old kid who has barely left their confines, their small town in maybe Oklahoma or their small town in Missouri or somewhere, and send them to a foreign country to fix them and tell them that, and to tell this person that their 4,000-year-old religion is false, but their 2,000-year-old religion is true. And I was so confused because and you see some people, like the ignorance about other cultures was so astounding.
Yes.
You see people asking me stupid questions. They were like, in Nigeria, do you have TVs in Nigeria? I'm like, what kind of, like, maybe they'll meet someone. Let's say, for example, they'll ask me, like, have you met, they'll seem like, do you know John from Kenya? I'm like, how am I going to know John from Kenya that you met 5 years ago? Because they think Africa is a country. It was bizarre. I'm like, how are you Americans so ignorant? Like, you guys are supposed to be one of the most educated countries. It puzzled me. Like, I couldn't understand the ignorance. It was so astounding to me.
How big is the city that you grew up in Nigeria?
It was a very big city. It was like millions of people in the city.
Right, millions of people, and then you go to London, and now you're having people in Oklahoma act like you're from the sticks or something.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly. They'll think that we live in the Bronze Age, that we have animals, that we live with animals. I'm like, I lived in a fucking. Sorry for cursing.
It's okay. It's fine.
I'm like, I lived in a city, a city, just like you did.
Yeah.
So I lived in a metropolitan city, in the capital.
Right.
I didn't live with animals. I don't know what they are talking about. It's so bizarre to me.
Yeah.
How the ignorance.
That's a great way to say it. Cultural ignorance. It is absolute.
And this is who they are sending to foreign countries for mission trips.
Right.
It blew my mind. That thing was so confusing to me.
Yes.
And I didn't know how to, because even though I believed in missions in theory, but what I was observing was very problematic. So one of the things that happened to me was I started taking an intellectual journey, and I started like branching out, because since I was so isolated and I was able to connect with people, even though there were lots of people here, intellectually and spiritually, I couldn't connect with them because of how different I was.
Yeah.
And all that. Then later on, I started studying philosophy, stoicism. I started studying like self-help stuff, psychology. I started studying like theology, anthropology. I just started branching out, mainly through books and podcasts. So I listened to a lot of podcasts. And that's when my view started changing. One of the first things that I changed my mind was homosexuality and all that, because I first came across the idea of same-sex attraction, because no one ever told me about same-sex attraction. They always just spoke about homosexuality as a sin.
Right.
And all that. However, I now heard of a lady that said that she knew she was gay when she was 4 years old. And I was so shocked. And I was like, how is that possible? So, like, that's when I changed my mind to same-sex attraction is actually maybe not wrong, but maybe homosexuality is wrong. So I started changing my mind. Then I started like going to see a therapist. So seeing the therapist really helped elevate a lot of the depression and stuff I was going through. And for a Christian therapist, he really helped me out.
Okay.
He really like helped me out, because one of the things I struggled with was the purity culture, pornography stuff. And pornography is one of the things that caused the most guilt and shame in my life, more than anything else.
Yeah.
The porn stuff. So this guy, and I used to still struggle with the fear of death. I want to be able to sleep. I want to be able to concentrate in class, because I was so scared of hell. Like, it affected my grades. That's how bad the fear of hell and all this stuff was. But this therapist helped me. And the two things he did for me was, he helped me psychologically and theologically break away from my parents.
Yes.
One of the things he told me was like, if you don't break away from your parents, you'll be in your 40s and your 50s, and you'll be regretting the life you have lived, because you lived your life as a slave to your parents instead of living for yourself.
Yeah.
And I really thank him for helping me see that and all that. That's one thing that he really helped me. And I really thank him. And he's very seminal to my deconversion. I don't know how he would feel about my deconversion,
right.
But he really helped me break away from my parents. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing he helped me do was that he started helping me see how a lot of my, what should I call it? A lot of people in church were pretending.
Yes.
More than and I started realizing how many people were hypocrites. I used to believe people too much. When a preacher said that he has not watched porn in the last 20 years, I'll just believe him because he's a preacher. And the therapist was like, you know that many of these people don't reveal to you who they really are. Right? And he's a Christian therapist. That's what's so funny. Like,
yeah.
Like, so he's a Christian, like, and he started making me see that, and I started seeing that, this is interesting. Then when I started spending time in church more, and I attended like a men's discipleship program, that's when I started seeing how a lot of people were pretending.
Right.
A lot of people were pretending and all that stuff. And as I started seeing that, this is not going well and all that stuff. So what happened was that I was able to graduate with my degree, but in between that time when I graduated, I started reading more. I came upon some of these like people that deconverted, like Dan Barker.
Yes.
And I came across people like, then he now, in one of his books, I was so shocked by some of the stuff I read in those books that I couldn't continue reading those books, because they made me see how violent God was, because I started seeing how God was abusive.
Right. Yes.
And I started seeing how, and what pained me was that even though I didn't want to believe them, I knew that they were right. Yeah. And I struggled with that. And that's one thing I really, really struggled with. And the more I kept reading, the worse it got for me and all that stuff. And yeah, so when I was able to graduate, I struggled to get a job.
Okay.
And all that. Then it's during that time that my deconversion now came to an uphill battle then, because I couldn't get a job. I started wondering what I was doing wrong. But previously, I had dropped the Word-of-Faith theology. Yeah. During this time of my study, I wasn't following it anymore. However, I couldn't get a job and I started struggling, and my isolation became so bad. And my mental health started getting worse and worse and worse. And I realized that reading the Bible made my mental health worse. Yikes. And all that. Reading the Bible, reading those scriptures about hell and all that. And I now realized that, okay, this is getting too out of hand. Then later on, I had to come to the point where I said, okay, this is enough. I'm like, when I just woke up one morning and I was like, I need to take control of my life. I need to take ownership of my life. Yeah. I need to go after my freedom or something. I just woke up one morning like that. Okay. But I didn't want to admit to myself then that meant I'm breaking away from Christianity, even though that's what it meant. Right. I just knew that I couldn't read the Bible anymore. I just knew that I had to take ownership of my life. Later on, I was not able to talk to a friend that became an atheist. The friend now recommended a few like books, not books, and mostly videos, like, videos and YouTube channels like Atheist Experience by Mandela Hunty. Yeah. Then Seth Andrews, I forgot what I called Thinking Atheist. And I started reading more. That's when I now finally was able to break away from Christianity and all that. And that's how I was able to get myself set free from all of it. Yeah, wow. So yeah, that's how it was. Yeah. it was a lot of struggle, and I still struggle with a lot of stuff till now because of that.
Was there one thing in particular, like you mentioned early on, reading Ray Comfort, that made you feel fear for your own salvation?
Yeah.
Was there one particular area of what the atheists were saying or what the apologists were saying that you felt like, yeah, that's just one too many things. I can't accept that?
Yeah, I think mine was the apologists tried to. The thing I couldn't reconcile was because the biggest thing that kept following me that after that bad experience with Comfort book was God's character. That thing about God being an angry God, an vengeful God in the Old Testament, I could never get around the explanations and rationalizations of that. This also includes the fear of hell, the hell stuff. I couldn't understand why you torture someone for all eternity. That thing always haunted me nonstop. Because I started seeing God's character as more and more abusive, especially when I started studying psychology. Right. And I started seeing that God is actually acting like an abusive person. If we just removed God and put David, we said David is abusive.
Right.
Like that's what it,
exactly.
So when it came to explaining that stuff about God's evil character, then suffering, that stuff about suffering, I could never get around human suffering because I started studying a lot of the 20th century genocides. And I could never get that thing. Drove me insane thinking about how God could watch Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, Pol Pot, and many of these genocidal leaders kill millions, hundreds of millions of people. I struggled with that, and the apologists never were able to satisfy my stuff, no matter how much they tried to. Those are the major ones that really got to me. Yeah.
Okay. So in the last few minutes here, what I'd like to hear is about, you've made your decision to be your own person. And one of your descriptions to me, you mentioned that justice is very important to you and potentially bringing that back to Nigeria. So talk about what you want to do now. I'm not sure if you call yourself a secular humanist, but
I'm a staunch secular humanist. Like I'm a proud secular humanist. That's what I identify as. Yeah.
Yeah. So talk about your ideas about justice and how that might be something you bring back with you to Nigeria.
While I emphasize justice, I emphasize humanism more.
Yeah.
So I have to go to humanism because I don't feel like justice can really be explained if I don't emphasize the humanism stuff. One of the things I say that I call myself like an existential humanist. Okay. That's what I call myself, meaning that there's nothing that gives our life meaning, at least in my opinion, outside of what we give it. And it's existential. Like our existence precedes, existence goes before essence and all that. Like when we exist, then we give our life meaning and essence and all that. Then one of the things I always say is I'm a cosmopolitan humanist, meaning that even though I am a Nigerian, I'm a Nigerian by identity and all that, although I identify more as an African. Even though I am an African, I'm a citizen of the world.
Right.
So I identify as a citizen of the world. And like, yes, I'm a Nigerian by birth and identity, and I'm proud of parts of my culture, and I'm not proud of other parts of my culture. I'm still a citizen of the world. So anything that affects someone else affects me.
Yes.
That human connection to everyone else. That's why I always emphasize cosmopolitan humanism and all that. And it's because it's affected. Like if for example, something happened, David is struck with cancer, God forbid, or something.
Yeah.
It affects me because David is my brother as a human being.
Yes.
And all that. So it affects me. So that's one of the things that I can't get through that part of justice, but I don't say every human being as one with me.
Right.
So the other point is I'm a planetary humanist.
Okay.
So that's what I call myself. A lot of this, sorry, before I continue, a lot of these ideas, all these words I'm getting is from a book called A Wealth of Insights by Bill Cook.
Okay.
And all that. So yeah, that's where I get a lot of what I'm saying here. So that's why he emphasizes a lot of this humanist stuff. So, the subtitle is called Humanist Insights from the 21st Century till now. So that's where I get a lot of my ideas from, if you're interested.
Excellent.
But what I mean by planetary humanist is that I'm a citizen of the planet in the sense that I am not just concerned about human life. I'm concerned about all plants, everything that is in the world. Because one of the things that happens with a lot of people is this anthropocentrism.
Right.
Anthropocentrism, I think that's what it's called, all right?
Yeah.
Where we think human beings are the center of the universe.
Yeah.
And we have to be very careful as humanists. Even though we use the term humanist, I'm not saying human beings are the center of the world. My definition of humanism means that human beings are capable and responsible for making the world a better place.
Yes.
And whatnot. So that's how all of this stuff are. So when it starts with the fact that when we are able to take care of, when existential humanism starts, is more of a personal stuff. It's just for me and how I view the world and all that. Then cosmopolitan humanism is how I'm connected to my community, whether it's my family for you, or whether it's my culture, my country, and all that. Then maybe the world around me. The planetary is how we treat the whole planet as a whole. That's the foundation of justice. Before we get to, that's how we can get to the justice. Because in order to bring justice, for example, to a place like Nigeria, we have to be able to address a lot of the fundamentalist ideas that have gone there. And it's a very complicated process because Nigeria is a country that is like a failed state. We're a British experiment. We were not a country because the British created us because they wanted to economically exploit us.
Right.
So it's not like America where they came and created a country and maybe there was slavery and Native American genocide there and whatever. But for us, we're just an experiment. That's why we're so divided as Nigerians, because there are hundreds of tribes and ethnic cultures.
Okay.
That's one of the very difficult things about dealing with Nigeria. So in order to be able to bring the justice stuff, we need to be able to call out like the fundamentalism. We need to be able to like change our constitution in Nigeria and all that. And we need to deal with we need to have better electoral reforms. Okay. In Nigeria. That's one of the things we need to do then we need to be able to like fight for religious freedom in terms of there's a lot of stigma against people that are declared atheists. We don't have any public atheists in Nigeria, and that's a problem. Right. Okay. In order for us to be able to bring to just improve our culture, in order for us to improve our infrastructure and all that, we need to be able to address a lot of these issues, and we need to be able to address our trauma that's related to colonization. Yeah. Too, as a country. So those are some of the few ways I feel like we can bring justice and humanism to Nigeria. But we need to be able to fight religious fundamentalists because they are very powerful there. So it's a very hard process, but yeah. I hear you. Yeah, it's not that it's simple by any means. Yes. That's one of the things that I want. And for me, that's one of the things, I think the thing that I feel like is the most important, even before justice, is what I call is the idea of freedom. Yes. And freedom, individual freedom is very important. Then this is before we go to a societal freedom. Individuals need to be able to have the freedom to be able to make decisions. And for people to be able to have freedom, they need access to resources too. Mm-hmm. So let's say, for example, because again, let's say in America, for example, compared to because poverty rate in Nigeria is so high. Many Americans now, of course, I'm not downplaying poverty rates in America because there are lots of poor people here, millions of poor people. So, however, compared to Nigeria, many Americans at least have some form of access to resources that can help improve their lives, even if it's just books and all that stuff, or maybe computers or going to a library or whatever. We don't have that much in Nigeria, and it now keeps the poverty stuff low. And our politicians, and this is one of the big things about our politicians are very hell-bent on keeping people poor so they can keep exploiting them. Okay. Because our politicians make hundreds of thousands of dollars, some of them maybe 80, sometimes some 70 to like $80,000 to like hundreds of thousands of dollars, every month. Wow. Okay. Every month. They make more than American politicians. Yeah. Way more than American politicians. And yet their nation is very poor because they keep stealing up. So if we don't have that sense of unity and freedom, people need to be able to realize that personal freedom, then we're now going to like societal freedom, how we can set ourselves free as a society. Then how does it work on a global level? How can different nations work together? Yeah. As humanism. And I feel humanism touches on all those things for me. I don't know. I've not, and other parts of philosophy, of course, and political history and whatever. So, but I feel like humanism does that. And the humanism I practice, secular humanism, is not looking to some God to fix your problems, which is one of the big problems with many Africans and especially Nigerians. They keep looking for God to fix their problems instead of fighting for themselves. Right. You need to have that sense of freedom and responsibility to be able to fight for your freedom, because your oppressors will not give you freedom willingly. You have to fight them for it. But if you keep depending on God or thinking that God is going to rescue you, then you'll not be able to fight. That's one of the big things we need to fight in Nigeria. That's trusting in God, that God will come and take care of you instead of trusting in yourself. Right. And if we don't have that sense of individual freedom and trust and self-reliance, there's no way we'll be able to bring any reform or any improvement in our society in Nigeria. Well, CG, I think you have just an amazing story. I'm sure that people will want to follow your journey. I understand you have an online presence. Yes. You want to tell people how they can reach you on Twitter, and you have a blog as well. Is that right? Yes, I have a blog. Yes, I do. On Twitter, you can reach me on African Polymath, just at African Polymath. So the spelling of African, I'm sure most people know how to spell African. Then Polymath is, Then Polymath is just Polymath.
Yes.
I know that's on Twitter. Then my email is the same thing, but it's just africanpolymath@gmail.com.
Uh-huh.
Then my blog, I just created my blog a few days ago, so it's still fresh. I'm going to chronicle my deconversion journey there very soon.
Okay.
It's going into a lot more detail than what I was able to cover in the podcast and all that. But it's called africanpolymath.wordpress.com.
Excellent. So we will have links in the show notes. So if anybody does have problem spelling, they'll figure it out.
Yes.
But CG, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yes, no problem. Yeah, I'm really grateful to be here. And I really want to appreciate what you do. Like, your podcast has meant so much to me. I've listened to like almost all of them. I'm about to listen to the one between you and your wife. I'm looking forward to that one. But yeah, I really enjoyed your podcast. It means a lot more than you know, because you may not think that you are impacting the life of like a Nigerian who is living isolated here in Oklahoma and all that. But your podcast has helped impact me. And in you interviewing people, getting to hear them, it means a lot.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Final thoughts on the episode. Well, if you made it this far, then you have been very patient with me and the audio quality of this episode. Thank you again for listening. My apologies. This was all on the recording side, so my bad. I will try to make things better in the future. As you can tell, CG has a somewhat unique story to tell. Being an immigrant in the United States, having come from Nigeria, having consumed so much American and UK media as a child, the perspective from the Word-of-Faith movement and prosperity gospel, growing through that into more of the Hillsong and a little bit more grace-oriented, and eventually recognizing how the religious trauma in his life was affecting him physically, and ultimately coming to a moment of deconversion. A point that we both bring up that I think is important is the recognition that apologists like Ray Comfort and others actually harm believers more than they help. CG, at the time that he was consuming the apologetics, was very much a believer, and yet it caused him to doubt his own personal salvation, and it caused him to suffer the fear of hell. The hell anxiety, the rapture anxiety, the fear for one's salvation is a very real thing that I think many believers suffer under, and CG expresses that so well. We started to run out of time there at the end, but you can hear the way that CG has organized his thoughts about humanism and justice. I love the way he talks about being an existential humanist, recognizing the lack of inherent meaning, and yet meaning is what we put into our lives, as well as the planetary humanist concept of being focused on not just everything that people want, but what is good for the entire planet, such that how we treat animals, how we treat the ecology affect us as human beings, and that is ultimately humanism as well. I very much encourage you to reach out to CG. Again, he's available at africanpolymath@gmail.com, as well as his blog, africanpolymath.wordpress.com, and those links will be in the show notes. He specifically mentioned that he has a set of resources available for the listeners, including a reading list of books that have been important to CG. Please check those out. You can find those in the show notes. I want to thank CG for being on the podcast and for sharing his story and sharing with us his wisdom. I think I learned quite a bit here. I have to say how ignorant I am of African nations and the specific political pressures that they are under. It was interesting to hear about the religious context there of wiping out historical, as he put it, 4,000-year-old religions with your 2,000-year-old religion, as well as the political forces of corruption and overcoming that, and that being such a sense of justice for CG. So CG, thank you for teaching me. Thank you for teaching our listeners. Appreciate you coming on the podcast. As I mentioned at the top of the show, the domain change to gracefulatheist.com had the weird side effect of losing some ranking in Google. So you can help out the podcast by Googling Graceful Atheist, deconversion, secular grace, and finding my link and clicking on it. That will help us rise in the rankings, as well as always, subscribe to the podcast wherever you are hearing this episode. Until next time, my name is David, and I am trying to be the graceful atheist. Join me and be graceful human beings. Time for the footnotes. The beat is called Waves from Mackay Beats. Links will be in the show notes. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can promote it on your social media. You can subscribe to it in your favorite podcast application, and you can rate and review it on podchaser.com. You can also support the podcast by clicking on the affiliate links for books on gracefulatheist.com. If you have podcast production experience and you would like to participate with the podcast, please get in touch with me. Have you gone through a faith transition and do you need to tell your story? Reach out. If you are a creator or work in the deconstruction, deconversion, or secular humanism spaces and would like to be on the podcast, just ask. If you'd like to financially support the podcast, there's links in the show notes. To find me, you can Google Graceful Atheist, you can Google deconversion, you can Google secular grace, you can send me an email, gracefulatheist@gmail.com, or you can check out the website, gracefulatheist.com. My name is David, and I am trying to be the graceful atheist. Join me and be graceful human beings. This has been the Graceful Atheist Podcast.